Hello, everyone, either kind of virtually or watching back. As Sarah said, I'm Dr. Caitlin Shaughnessy. I've been working in kind of the field of music and education, or maybe like 8 years now, if I count all the various studies I've done. I did my PhD at Roehampton with Adam, which focused on autistic children and their families and their kind of experiences in music making. And then my research has kind of continued to look at that and what we can do more practically to support these groups. As we know, it's kind of a growing area of need, and families and educators, music hubs are all kind of crying out for support. So I'm going to share my screen. Yell if you can't see it or if things are going wrong. Does that all look good?
Yep.
Great. I'm getting thumbs. I'm just going to move your faces. Fabulous. So I know that you have probably already heard a lot about Sounds of Intent and what it does and what it can do. But just as a quick recap, a lot of my research uses Sounds of Intent in the early years, particularly looking at the 4 levels of engagement that children in the early years might be engaging with music. So level 2, sounds interesting. Level 3, copy me, copy you. Level 4, bits and pieces. And level 5, whole songs in time and in tune. And that was kind of what my original research was based on, is what does this look like for autistic children? So as we know, Sounds of Intent in the early years offers a model of how children's ability to engage with music develops from the time that they're born to when they're around 5. What my research looked at is, how does this look for autistic children? Is it different? Is it similar? And what we saw, that this model can also be used and is appropriate and matches with the experiences of autistic children. It can be a useful way of measuring musical progress, and we can also use it to kind of help develop some resources and activities for autistic children, and how it may support their kind of wider development. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm just going to give you a very brief introduction to autism, some of the history of the research in this area for those that might not be so familiar. Although kind of the growing awareness of autism has really kind of skyrocketed since I've started doing research and continuing. So some describe it as a spectrum, kind of clinically it's described as a spectrum, but also a constellation or a rainbow, and it's kind of a mix of lots of different factors. So commonly there are differences in social communication, and autistic people might struggle to kind of recognize some certain social cues, but equally as neurotypical people kind of struggle to interpret how autistic people might be communicating and expressing themselves as well. So there's kind of a mismatch there. Emotional understanding, that similar kind of misunderstanding between 2 different styles of communicating. Autistic people, and particularly children, can have quite specific sensory sensitivities throughout my research. So I have an autistic brother, and so I use him quite often as an example of particular kind of my own experience. But autistic children, often loud noises can be quite overwhelming, and kind of lots of different things going on at once can be very stressful, and that creates a bit of a problem when we're talking about music and how we might build kind of a supportive musical environment. Some might have other learning or language delays. So my own experience with a lot of the families I worked with, as well as my own family, is that additional non-speaking children, as well as additional kind of intellectual disabilities that come alongside autism, but that's not always the case. And also special interests. Autistic people quite often have they're really interested in particular things, which can be a really great way to engage them. Their special interest might be music, but it also might be, I had a child that I worked with that was really into like Thomas the Tank Engine, and then we just did a lot of music on Thomas the Tank Engine because that was what he loved. So it's things like that if you can kind of understand and get to know an autistic person and their special interests, that might also be a way to working with them if you're working music with them as well. So in terms of where we are with autism in education more widely, as well as in research, so a lot of the behavior research that was typically done with autistic people and children is now seen as quite harmful and traumatic in the way that education and research was trying to find out how we could fix, in inverted commas, autistic behaviors. So now with research and education and the approach within education, I think more widely is looking to understand how we can support autistic people in a world that is developed for neurotypical people, and really nurturing and acknowledging the differences in cognitive style. So I've talked about what said here, the spiky profile. So autistic people might be really kind of excellent at some things, but then really struggle in other areas, and just kind of nurturing, acknowledging that difference, and trying to think about how we can create an environment to support them. So again, tailoring that support and awareness within the environments that you're creating, developing strategies to help them learn, and as well as teaching those around them to how to understand their needs so that they can thrive. So within a classroom, or when you're working with an autistic child, how do you need to set up the space? What do you need to do in the ways that you work with them so that they can kind of develop musically and kind of really fulfill their musical potential? Particularly here as well, so the environmental adjustments or accommodations are as important as behavioural support. Things to remember when working with autistic children, if you're kind of meeting an autistic child for the first time, is that strangers and breaks in routines can be quite stressful. So if you the first time you meet an autistic child and it doesn't go very well, it's not probably isn't anything personal. Kind of a break in routine can be quite difficult. It might take them time to get used to you and so interested in the instruments, and just kind of have that patience and understanding. Particularly as we're talking about with sensory sensitivities, you might not know which ones they find particularly stressful. I mean, I know from working with some children that bells can either be they love it or they hate them, and if they hate them, just make sure they're out the way and out of eye lines, so they don't feel kind of worried during the session that they might be used. And repetition can be a really great way, and the autistic children might love repeating the same thing kind of over and over and over again. Adam can talk a bit more about the research that has shown maybe why this is and why they get kind of they find it so engaging. And that's fine. That's okay. That's a kind of a strategy that you can use to engage them, and not always trying to move them on to the next thing too quickly. So all of that aside, moving on to what we actually have done with autistic children. So some of my research has kind of shown the importance of music in the lives of autistic children. We hear this a lot from parents and teachers, and a lot of Adam's research has shown this as well. Music can almost be a proxy language, so a space for development, and as a shared language that might be more understood than just kind of talking. There's been some research that's been shown that there's higher rates of perfect pitch in autistic children than the general population. So there's something there about a musical environment that is interesting, and that they are able to access in a way that the kind of general population might not be able to access. I've always, in my research, looked at music as a space for social interaction, so it can provide those opportunities for joint attention, for eye contact, and kind of shared understanding or empathy in a way that other spaces might not. It's also, and this is actually coming through a lot more now that research is being done with autistic adults, is it's a really important outlet for mood regulation and creative expression, and kind of with taking away from kind of the stresses of everyday environments, which within a neurotypical world for autistic people can really affect their mental health. So what is kind of the lay of the land for autistic children and young people and music? So we have music therapy, which is quite often what people think when we think about autism and music, because of the kind of clinical background of a lot of the research that's been done. So can be like once a week, a bit more, very, very varied formats. But as we know with music therapy, quite often there's a long waiting list. It's very hard to access. Short length of programs. It's often private, so it's exclusionary in those ways as well, and also might not necessarily meet meet the needs of what an autistic person wants to get from them, their musical experiences. Private tuition, so just learning the piano or guitar or whatever. So this is typically kind of much more accessible for those with lower support needs, or kind of learning classical instruments. But we still kind of hear from teachers that they don't really feel that they're supported in some of those more challenging behaviours that might be occurring because they're not aware of how to support the autistic young person they're working with, and also a lack of awareness of neurodivergent learning strategies. I don't know if Adam's talked much previously about the kind of value of learning by ear and things like that might really appeal to an autistic child or a young person, but the kind of emphasis on potentially music reading and exams that private tuition might focus on. And classroom music is probably where autistic children might come across music most regularly. Music lessons, unfortunately, I'm sure we all now are much more ad hoc than they used to be, and usually involves an entire class, which 30 kids banging a drum or bells or recorders or whatever, if you're thinking about trying to create a supportive sound environment for someone who might have high sensory needs, is not the greatest place to be in. So classroom-based music can really cause quite a lot of sensory problems. Classroom teachers might lack confidence, and particularly in how to adapt it for autistic young people, and it's limited. So what tuning in therefore wanted to do is to look at how we could design a musical program that we can delivered by parents. So simple, easy strategies that can be integrated into everyday life. We had some ideas about how we could bring some of the tuning in evidence about everyday routines, so hello and goodbye, joint play, kind of copy games, and also musical interest. And we really wanted to look at, does this work? So how do autistic children engage with music, and how does music help development in everyday life? So the initial project, we worked with over 30 families. I think we've now worked with over 50 over a year, visiting parents and children in their homes, providing them with some of the resources that I'll get onto in a minute to really see how parents and children were able to engage and how this was able to support their musical development. Some of the cards were framed around some of the other research that Adam has done with children who are visually impaired, or might have found multiple learning difficulties. So they focused on listening and responding, making sounds and music, sounding interesting, copy me, copy you, bits and pieces. But these we worked quite carefully to make sure that all of the activities and the prompts on the cards were adapted and were specific to the specific needs that autistic children might have. So thinking about the kind of sensory interests that autistic children might have. So this is an example of a card at level 2. So there are 24 cards, and I'll provide a link to the cards later that go through the sounds of intent levels with some reactive, proactive, and interactive activities for each one. So this kind of shows you how at a level 2 level you can kind of engage with an autistic child to support their sensory interests. An example of a level 3, so we're thinking about that imitation and that the copying for autistic children, as we say on the back of the card, that sense of echolalia and wanting to repeat things is a very normal stage of development and something to be supported, but just to encourage that give and take and support their way of communicating. And finally, kind of going up to level 5, supporting their musical interests by singing them songs, but also nurturing their own interests as well. So what we found from the parents that have engaged with us, as well as actually some of the early years practitioners that we've now worked with, is that they really liked how flexible it was and the fluid developmental structure. So depending on both the child and actually the parent and their confidence, they could kind of dip in and out of the cards, also depending on how the child was feeling on the day, but they found that they could take it around. It gave them activities to do, not just at home, but maybe on the bus, in the park, all of those kinds of things. We found kind of by tracking some of the development of the children over the course of the research that autistic children were really engaged by musical spaces and by the activities that we provided, and they were all able to develop musically using some of the prompts and the activities that we used. And for some, this was a really important outlet for communication as well, that they used music to communicate in a way that they couldn't necessarily verbally. There were a couple of examples of families and children using songs to understand. I know that that's the song that means they need to go to the toilet, or they want their favorite food and things like that. But what we did see is that for those that had the highest support needs, so who might also have a learning disability, they needed a little bit of extra support in order to reach their developmental potential, and parents needed that as well. And so that then got us thinking about how we can make these supports even more accessible. So can we integrate the cards at school as well as at home, which we have done some work with Services for Education in Birmingham to look at whether early years practitioners can use these as well. Autistic children were self-directed. Anyone that's met an autistic child knows that they like to do what they want to do, and they engage with the instruments on their own terms, and also the use of technology and YouTube and videos to complement, and the end of that sentence seems to have disappeared, but to complement their musical explorations. So to kind of aim to bridge this gap between the interests that they had in their virtual environments and YouTube and screen and their musical environments, we came up with this idea of the instrument family, which is we worked with some animators to design these characters that look like and are real handheld instruments that mimic the actions and sounds that children can follow and try and bridge this gap between their virtual and real worlds. So I'm going to hopefully share my sound, and I'm going to show you some of these animations that we've developed. We've trialed these again with a lot of families, try to co-create the entire process and make sure that what we're developing is something that is appealing to autistic children and can be used by parents and practitioners as a way to support their musical engagement. So again, just yell if the sound isn't coming through.
Play the bells while we sing. Play the bells, all join in. Play the castanets while we sing. Play the castanet.
In the interest of time, I won't play the whole thing because it will also go around in your head for the rest of the week. We have one before this called Hello, which introduces all the instruments as well. So this is Kathy the castanet, and you've just seen Bobby the bells, and we go through them all. And I think this is some feedback we got from a parent about how these animations are working to really bridge the gap. And as you'll have seen in that video, the shake of the bells and the clap of the castanet and some others that we'll look at in a minute, they were able to identify the character, recognize the character, but also recognize the instruments and be able to tap along and shake along, which really helped them. And it kind of took some of the load off the parents and the practitioners to kind of model that. So as we kind of developed these a bit further, we were thinking about, okay, well, how can we do this to support musical development? Pardon me. So we've also animated the sound and silence song, which is a bit more and kind of musically orientated in terms of developing skills around patterns.
Hi everyone, my name's Kai. Let's play the sound and silence song. You are playing with the music, joining in. When you hear the song start, you begin. But when it stops, you stop too. Listen all around. ready to get going again. I am. Can you copy me? Your turn. You are playing with the music.
And it goes like that through all the instruments. So I hope you can see there how we've kind of developed it slightly more to really support some of these music making behaviors rather than just kind of simply playing along. And in the interest of time, I probably won't show this video, but this is just kind of an example of a practitioner working with a child to kind of show how this works in everyday life. And I know that I'm short on time, Sarah, so I'm going to stop there. All of the animations, all of the characters, and all of the cards are available on the web, which I'm hoping that QR code is going to take you to.